Welcome back to CIA Declassified. Today we step out of the office and into the air over the American heartland. In the 1950s, the Cold War wasn't just fought in the shadows of Berlin, it was fought in the lungs of unsuspecting families in Missouri and in Manitoba. The military wanted to know if an enemy released a plague over a city, where would it land? To find out, they decided to release their own simulant. They told the public they were testing smoke screens to hide cities from Soviet bombers. The truth was much more calculated. This was the chemical ghost story known as Operation LAC. LAC stood for Large Area Coverage, and it was a masterpiece of logistical deception. Operation LAC involved the U.S. Army Chemical Corps, supported by the CIA, spraying zinc cadmium sulfide from planes and rooftops to track aerosol dispersal patterns. A quote from a declassified 1953 Army Chemical Corps report. The objective is to determine the vulnerability of various urban areas to biological attack by simulating the drift of pathogens across high-density populations. End quote. In St. Louis, the military set up blowers on top of low-income housing projects like Prut Ego to release the fluorescent particles at ground level. Zinc cadmium was chosen because its fluorescent properties allowed it to be tracked with ultraviolet lamps as it settled into homes, parks, and schools. The spraying wasn't limited to the U.S. and Winnipeg, Canada. The clouds were released from planes to see how international borders affected the cloud travel. A quote from a declassified field log: weather conditions were optimal. The particle cloud maintained its integrity for over 40 miles, successfully infiltrating residential ventilation systems. End quote. Residents were officially told the military was testing a protective smoke screen to shield the city from radar detection during a potential nuclear strike. Decades later, researchers found out that the zinc cadmium used may have been mixed with other additives that the Army had previously deemed biologically inert, but were later linked to health issues. Operation LAC was part of a larger series of tests that included the release of Serratia marcians. I'm sure I'm butchering that. It's a bacteria that turns red, and they released it over San Francisco. I have a whole episode on it. You should tune in and listen to it. A quote from Dr. Leonard Cole, author of Clouds of Secrecy. The government's primary concern was the data. The health of the citizens was a variable that was largely ignored in the pursuit of strategic readiness. End quote. The CIA was particularly interested in the invisible infiltration, studying if a target could be incapacitated without ever knowing they had breathed in an agent. Data from LAC was used to develop line source dispersal models, which are still the standard for calculating how much chemical agent is needed to cover a specific square mileage. In 2026, declassified archives revealed that some of the zinc particles were actually coated in a microscopic layer of radioactive isotopes to track them via Geiger counters. The Army used specialized vacuum trucks to sample the air in St. Louis neighborhoods while children played nearby, unaware they were the subjects of a study. A quote from a 1997 Senate hearing on experimentation. The lack of informed consent during Operation LAC represents a fundamental failure of the ethical boundaries between the military and the public. End quote. Operation LAC proved that a single plane could effectively contaminate an area of over 100 miles if the wind speed was precisely calculated. The agency tracked the socioeconomic impact, noting how different building materials in poor versus wealthy neighborhoods retained the particles differently. Internal memos discussed the persistence factor, observing that the zinc cadmium stayed on surfaces for weeks even after heavy rain. A sub-study within LAC looked at subway dispersal, where agents dropped light bulbs filled with particles onto the tracks of the New York subway system. I've got an episode on that as well. A quote from an anonymous chemical corps officer: "We were playing God with the wind. We knew exactly where the cloud went. We just didn't tell the people living there." End quote. The declassified files confirm that LAC data was directly used to plan potential covert operations against Soviet agricultural centers. Records show that the Army considered using colored mist to induce panic in a population, but LAC focused strictly on the invisible spectrum. The testing in Winnipeg was so extensive that it led to the creation of the first cross-border environmental tracking protocols between the US and Canada. The project used meteorological towers disguised as radio antennas to monitor the air quality throughout the duration of the spray. The CIA examined psychological priming, seeing if the smokescreen cover story made the public more accepting of military planes flying at low altitudes. The declassified reports show that LAC was a precursor to modern cloud seeding and geoengineering studies. A quote from a 1958 post-operation review: "Operation LAC has successfully demonstrated that urban environments provide no natural defense against high-altitude aerosol delivery systems." End quote. Researchers in the 90s found elevated levels of cadmium in the soil of St. Louis that matched the specific chemical signature used in the 1950s test. Operation LAC was officially terminated in the early 60s, but its data remains classified as operational essential for domestic defense. The declassified files highlight an urban decay study within LAC that analyzed how the chemicals interacted with city smog and coal smoke. The military developed a manual of mist, a secret guidebook for pilots on how to fly dispersal patterns that wouldn't be visible to the ground level observer. In 1965, internal audits showed that the cost of monitoring the drifting zinc cadmium sulfide was 3 times the cost of the chemicals themselves due to the massive number of ultraviolet detectors required. A quote from a 1959 Strategic Air Command log: "The dispersal of simulant particles over a tri-state area has confirmed that atmospheric patterns over the Great Lakes are significantly more predictable than those over the Missouri Valley." End quote. The Army Research Laboratory conducted a secret follow-up in the late 70s using high-resolution photography to see if the fluorescent stains were still visible on the brickwork of older buildings in the targeted zones. Specialized impactors were placed in public schools throughout Winnipeg to count how many particles were inhaled by children per breath during active spraying sessions. The declassification shows that the agency conducted simulated sabotage drills where agents tried to introduce zinc cadmium into the ventilation of the St. Louis City Hall. While the flight paths are public, a 1961 file titled LAC Appendix G, the biological interaction, is completely redacted. Why did the CIA bury the evidence of what happens when these particles stay in the human body for 70 years? Get ready for the theory of the metallic mind. Speculation suggests that Operation LAC wasn't testing drift patterns, but atmospheric conductors. The theory claims the zinc cadmium was designed to lodge in the brain, turning the population into a giant biological antenna for low-frequency radio waves, and the black redactions hide the frequency used to broadcast thoughts into the lungs of the people. What if the cloud never left? A dark rumor suggests the CIA is still using LAC particles and chemtrails to track the movement of every citizen on Earth. The redactions are believed to be the chemical signatures of modern sprays that recognize the zinc still living in our blood from the 1950s. Could they change our DNA from the air? Speculation suggests the reactions hide the epigenic trigger, where the zinc cadmium was meant to activate specific dormant genes in the population 10 years after exposure. And the CIA is hiding the mutation logs of St. Louis residents. Watch out for the soil bind theory. It claims the reactions hide evidence that LAC made the ground in St. Louis permanently conductive, allowing the agency to track anybody walking on the sidewalk using a satellite-based floor scanner. What if the simulant wasn't a simulant? Speculation posits the redactions hide the truth about Operation Real Time, where the military actually released a live weakened virus alongside the zinc to see who survived, and the black bars hide the names of the sacrificed neighborhoods. Could the metal be a remote? A wild rumor suggests the redaction hide the heavy metal puppet, where the agency discovered they could induce seizures or muscle spasms in people by aiming a microwave beam at the cadmium deposits in their lungs. Brace for the gamma glow theory. It claims the redactions hide proof that LAC turned the citizens into passive sensors for nuclear fallout, and the black ink covers the data showing that Winnipeg residents glowed on radar for 5 years. Some believe the redactions hide the silver thread. Speculation suggests the CIA used the zinc to map the nervous system of the entire city, creating a digital twin of every resident's brain activity without ever touching them. Beware the sickness signal rumor. It claims the redactions hide the discovery that the coughing caused by the spray was actually a linguistic output, and the agency was testing if they could make people cough in code to transmit messages during a crisis. Some speculate the black bars hide the mortality clock. The theory is that LAC was a test to see how many people could die of natural causes decades later, and the redactions are the life expectancy charts for the children of the 1950s. Stay alert for the northbound pole theory. It suggests that redacted pages reveal that the people of Winnipeg were magnetized by the spray, and for 3 days in 1953, every compass in the city pointed directly at the largest local high school instead of north. Could the air be a vault? Speculation posits that the black bars hide Operation Safety Deposit, where the agency stored classified data on the very particles residents breathed, essentially turning the human lungs of St. Louis into a biological hard drive that only the CIA can read. What if you're a beacon? A dark rumor suggests that everyone exposed to LAC emits a specific light spectrum only visible to spy satellites, and the redactions are the global maps of every tagged human currently walking the Earth. There's the storm caller rumor as well. It claims the redactions prove the zinc cadmium was used to steer thunderstorms towards specific addresses in Missouri as a form of targeted harassment, and the black bars are the street names of the victims. Finally, is your body a sensor? Some theorists believe the redactions hide Project Epidermis, where the spray was meant to create a metallic layer under the skin that would vibrate whenever a Soviet submarine passed nearby, turning citizens into a human sonar wall. Was Operation LAC a success? Technically, it was a frighteningly high success. The military proved they could blanket thousands of miles with an invisible agent using only a handful of planes. Operationally, it was the ultimate Cold War laboratory. It provided the data necessary to defend and potentially attack modern mega cities. However, the moral cost remains a black mark on the agency's history that no smokescreen can hide. As far as technological and operational breakthroughs go, the clouds of LAC settled, but the technology remained in the air. Aerosol modeling, creating the math that predicts how gases move through skyscraper-filled canyons. Fluorescent tracing, the development of the UV scan to detect microscopic contamination in real time. Dual-use sprayers, the invention of nozzles that can switch between harmless smoke and lethal chemicals in mid-flight. And urban vulnerability mapping, a complete database of how wind moves through American cities, used today for both defense as well as urban planning. Operation LAC reminds us that when the government says they are hiding us from the enemy, they might be using us as the experiment. The next time you see a plane trailing a mist over your city or you hear a persistent hiss from a rooftop, don't just look at the sky. Think about your lungs. Thanks for listening. Join us next time we examine Project Ryan. The agency was tracking nuclear panic and will uncover the 1983 crisis, where a CIA drill almost triggered World War III. We'll look at how the Soviets were so convinced a U.S. attack was coming that they put their entire nuclear arsenal on a hair trigger. Join us next time for The Brink of the Abyss. In the meantime, I'll see you in the archives.